I was more traumatised by the way the police dealt with me than what actually happened, and would never go to them for help again. And I am more afraid of the police than being raped again. How does that make you feel to read statements like this?
Really, really sad.
Horrified. That's it. But the strength of the comments within that report did surprise me, actually.
Okay. Because for us, it was absolutely not surprising as ISVs to read this. Everything that's in the survey, we knew.
Hello, so we're here today to have a discussion around rape and sexual violence. And just before I sort of talk about the specifics we're going to talk about, it might be worth just perhaps giving a bit of context as to where we're at as a country and a police force around rape and sexual violence. So the numbers of reported rapes have been increasing for year on year for a long time now. And as those numbers have increased, the number of people we charge primarily and take to court, rightly so, has been falling or not rising at the same rate, I suppose it's fair to say. So that's been a trend that was recognised 3 or 4 years ago by the government, and the government quite rightly challenged police forces to improve their performance around that and to charge more people. That led to a number of reports, and kind of at the same sort of time there have been a number of high profile cases which you may or may not be aware of in the national press, which have, I suppose, a lot of those cases have involved police officers as the perpetrators, and we shouldn't shy away from that fact. And of course what that's done is the public are less likely to trust us when we have those high profile cases involving police officers. So if you put all those factors together, we were quite rightly challenged to improve our how we investigate rape, really. So to do that, the Home Office set up a thing called Operation Bluestone in Avon and Somerset Police Force area as a kind of a project, if you like, to figure out what really works. So the idea was that the police there would work really closely with academic partners. So you would have academics that would come in and look at all the evidence to say what really works as opposed to what police think works. And that project that's been running for about 2.5 years now. And they've kind of really sort of developed a process. They call it the National Operating Model. What that really is a kind of a way for police forces to investigate rape, the best way, if you like, depending on all the evidence and all the research that's gone into it. So that National Operating Model was unveiled to all forces in the summer this year, and the idea is that all 43 police forces in the country now start to adopt it and to incorporate it into how we work. So part of that National Operating Model is a survey that's been running for around about 18 months now and continues to run at the moment, around rape victims and survivors and how they were treated by the police and the criminal justice system around that. And the idea of that survey is that people can give their experiences anonymously, and they can tell us truthfully how it was for them. And what we really want to do from that is obviously gain the learning from that to improve as a police force, so that we get better, because we realise that over time we've not necessarily done things in the right way in terms of rape investigation and specifically how victims are treated within that, and we'll probably talk some more about that, I'm sure, a bit later on. But the survey was a run across the whole country, so it wasn't just for Thames Valley Police. Just short of 2,000 respondents in total. In Thames Valley we had 119 people responded to that survey, so there's quite good local numbers of people that have told us how they were experienced. That's where we are, and really we're here today to have a discussion, I think, around those certainly the TVP specific points, but also that I think it's also worth incorporating some of the wider national points around how rape is investigated and how we deal with it, really, so that we can reflect, take stock of where we're at, and ultimately obviously to improve, really. So that's hopefully sets the scene as to where we're at. So my name is Stuart Bosley. I'm a detective superintendent in Thames Valley Police, and I'm head of our rape and sexual offending teams. Should we do introductions?
Sure. I'm the ISVA manager at Oxfordshire Sexual Abuse and Rape Crisis Centre, and ISVA stands for Independent Sexual Violence Advisor, and the role of an ISVA is to support survivors, victims and survivors going through the criminal justice system.
I'm Heather, and I'm a senior independent sexual violence advisor at Trust House, also supporting survivors, victims and survivors through the criminal justice system.
And I'm Fiona Pearce. I'm a detective inspector with Thames Valley Police, and I'm on the rape and sexual offences team. I also manage the SOLOs, who are sexual offence liaison officers who support our victims of rape, and I'm also the force lead for special measures, which are a series of measures available to people, to victims when they go to court, to help them to give their evidence.
And the reason we've invited Heather and Leah here today is because the clues in the name, ISVA, stands for Independent Sexual Violence Advisors. So you're not working for the police or anything like that, you're completely independent, but obviously we have to work closely together to make sure we collectively get the best outcome, isn't it, really? So we welcome that kind of challenge that you will no doubt give us in some of these questions, really. So there we go, so that's the introductions done then. So should we start off with a question? Who wants to go first with a question?
Shall I go?
Sure.
So going back to the survey you mentioned, it was a national survey for victims and survivors, and there were some positives in there, but unfortunately it was overwhelmingly quite disappointing results from most victims who've been in the criminal justice system. One of the things that stood out was that 75% of respondents nationally reported their experience of reporting and being involved with the criminal justice system had negatively impacted their mental health, and this is even when they didn't actually have any mental health issues before for some of them. Within Thames Valley Police, the results were 10% lower than the national average of those who had identified with a mental health condition. So what training and support is being given to first responders and officers to enable them to provide an appropriate response to survivors who are still impacted by the shock and distress of rape or sexual assault, which, as we know, can last for decades, not just at the beginning of it happening.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, I've answered that, and I think firstly, I agree with your sort of summary of the survey results. That they weren't good reading. It wasn't a good day as a police officer to read those survey results. We weren't proud of those. But it's important that we're honest about that. We don't try and, we're not here to hide away from it, I suppose, really is the first point. In terms of what training have we delivered to our officers to make their interactions better, I think it's fair to say. So if you perhaps take it chronologically, really, in terms of how it's reported to us. So a rape will happen, unfortunately, and it will get reported to us by someone, whether it's the victim or whether it's on their behalf. We've done some work with our call handlers who take those calls to make sure they show empathy and understanding when they are taking those calls, because I think experience has showed us, I think the sort of national evidence is there, that basically those initial conversations, no matter who that's with, whether it's a call handler, whether it's with an officer, whether it's with a detective, whoever that might be, are crucial. They're absolutely crucial for making that person feel comfortable with, they're not feel comfortable after what's happened to them, because it's obviously a horrific experience, but more comfortable with who's dealing with it and how and have confidence in that person, really. So, and I think the key to that is across whoever that is to show empathy, understanding, some awareness of the trauma that they've gone through, I think, because we understand that how it, and one of the things we're trying to do now is to make sure that officers understand that trauma and that horrific event that's happened to them can affect people in many different ways, and we mustn't be judging people in terms of however that happens, because that's a really important point. Officers, when they respond to those reports, they probably feel a bit. I think scared is too impactful a term, I suppose. But actually, then sometimes they're not sure, and it's up to us in terms of how they should be speaking to people and how they have those conversations. So we've done a lot of work with our sexual offence liaison officer teams, and they've delivered inputs to all of our frontline officers, so all those people who would go and take those reports around how they should speak to people. And that is really the softer skills of communication that we were trying to get our officers to be better at, I suppose, really. That's happened now across all of the police areas. and we're unveiling another piece of work in February, which kind of builds on that. Really, it's sponsored by the National Operating Model, if you like, in terms of it takes all their learning, and we're going to deliver that training again to all those officers, because one thing we do find is that we might need to teach it twice. We might need to teach it more than once, because reinforcement helps officers to understand it and to really drive the message home. So we need officers to understand that's how we want people to be treated, I suppose.
Can I just ask another question on that point?
Yeah.
It's great that there's going to be more solos supporting officers that are on the front line, but there seems to be a bit of a shortage of solos at the moment. So how is that going to be addressed in the Thames Valley?
We haven't got enough solos, I think it's fair to say, to deliver what we need to deliver.
Yeah.
And that's been subject of a bid that I put forward to our chief officer team to hopefully get some more solos. I'd like to get some more solos. I think the more solos we have, the better. I think so. Our solos do a great job, I think, and personally, and I think I'll hand to you in a second, Fiona. But I think I would like more of them, because as I said at the beginning of this talk, the numbers of reports of rape we've had have grown year on year and year on year, and we need to make sure that our specialist officers that deal with those reports have grown in the same type of numbers. So I think it's really important that we do what we can to get more solos. We also have a problem with, let's be honest, the public service is not flush with money at the moment, so that will be a challenge for me to win those arguments, but it's a battle that I'm certainly determined to make, to do the best we can for victims. So does that answer that bit of it?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think something that really strikes me in this since the beginning of this conversation actually is that we're focusing a lot on rape, and we support sexual violence survivors. So that means that is rape, that's sexual assault by penetration, sexual assault, and supporting survivors over the last couple of years. It has felt that there is more of a hierarchy in terms of how sexual assault survivors have been treated compared to rape survivors. And I just was wondering if there was something that you wanted, because, for example, when you think about solos, when we started, we used to be able to call a solo for a sexual assault.
Well, you still can.
Yeah.
So the solos will deal with penetrative assault. So effectively, Section 1 and Section 2 of the Sexual Offences Act. So that's a rape or an assault by penetration. Okay, so those are the primary offences that the solos will deal with, because those are the offences that CID or domestic abuse will also investigate primarily. When it comes to all the other offences that are covered by the Sexual Offences Act, those offences will not be taken on by the solos, simply because we haven't got capacity to do that. And I don't have the figures in front of me, but we have a phenomenal amount of sexual offences that get reported to us. I know that we're doing a piece of work at the moment looking at how victims are told that their cases have been discontinued, because we've got a really good established process for that when it comes to your rape cases. But when it comes to those other sexual offences, that's something which is quite difficult. And also what you'll have is you might have a uniform officer that's been investigating a sexual assault. When the decision's made to discontinue, then it's down to that officer to let the victim know. But that officer won't have had the same amount of training as solos, or a CID officer, or a domestic abuse officer. So that's something that probably I would say in the last 3 or 4 months we've really started to pick up, because of feedback from yourselves, which of course we're always grateful, that, for all the feedback. So we started to look at that as a further piece of work. But it's the investigation of sexual offences, and I mean all the sexual offences, is massive. We've started to make some inroads with rape, because that's the most serious, that's hitting all the headlines at the moment, but there is so much more to be done. And one of the things that we are finding now with the work that we've been doing around the rape, we have monthly meetings now with all our police areas where we scrutinise the rapes that they're dealing with and the other sexual offences. And we found that by doing that, with the learning that we've delivered, we've got a better understanding of the investigation of the other sexual offences, which has been kind of a knock-on effect. But yeah, that's something that we're sort of looking at the moment, because it doesn't matter what the offence is, it can affect somebody in a different way. This is it, and you can't determine. Section 1 rape is the highest, the most awful offence, but that would affect someone in one way. If somebody's had an offence which is maybe one of the other offences, that could be equally as impactful in that person.
Yeah.
And this is what we're finding through the feedback from yourselves, and sometimes through feedback through some of our officers as well, because we've got a team of specialists, which are the solos that are there supporting. We've got experienced detectives as investigators that work on our child abuse, our domestic abuse, and our CID. And then you've got some really keen and positive officers within our shift officers, but not all of them understand the complexities of it. So sometimes it's not through lack of wanting to do the right thing. It's just that kind of knowing what the correct routes are. So yeah.
I think if I was just killing a couple of points on that as well, and I think well, the first thing I agree with you completely. Nationally, it's called RASO, RA. Rape and serious sexual offences. In this force, we don't make that distinction. It's rape and sexual offending. That's it. There's no serious sexual offending, because I completely understand that there is no, particularly to individual people, that distinction shouldn't be drawn in terms of what is a serious offence. All offences we treat seriously. That's the first point I would say. And the second reason why this is important for me is that if you look at the national operating model, they have these pillars which are basically sort of streams of work within them. The second one is about repeat suspects. This is really important for me. We know that people in the sexual offending world, if that's what these people do, they will repeatedly offend, or can repeatedly offend, and their behaviour can escalate, which means that they can, and again, I don't mean to belittle this, but a sexual touching could happen one day. If that person gets emboldened, they might want to get their kicks in a different way, and eventually that person could go on to commit rapes. There's a well-established kind of academic base of evidence to support that. We recognise that, and we put in place a process to stop that, or to try and stop that, and increase awareness amongst our officers. We call it Operation Yeomanry, which is a kind of system to intervene with people before they go on to commit those other offences. And that's not to belittle the precursors, so-called precursor offences. They're all serious, but that's why the investigation of those offences is so important, because if we can intervene and we can either put someone in prison or give some sort of punishment that deters them and they go off into a different path, we see that as a good thing, because it could prevent further victims. So I agree. We have to prioritise, and I think, let's be honest, rape is the offence that has got the headlines nationally over the last 3-4 years, and we have to prioritise our resources there, but it's not to mean that we don't focus on the other offences as well.
Yeah. If I could jump in there, from the survey, one of the most common reasons for reporting from survivors was said to be to stop reoffending, and you touched upon that about picking up on people early and prevention, which is obviously needs to be done. And 45% said that their protection from the perpetrator would have enabled them to stay with the long-term investigation, but because they didn't feel protected and they didn't feel safe, they actually withdrew from supporting an investigation. So what's being done on that side, realising it's difficult to actually get convictions, but what more can be done to make survivors feel safer when they go and report? Because obviously once they've reported, their anxiety will go through the roof that, they might come and find me, they'll be angry with me. And although there are laws in place, it seems to be that people are not feeling protected enough at the moment.
Yes. No, I agree, and I think there's a number of points here. I mean, I think firstly, when I read the survey, it was the number one reason, wasn't it? What the people wanted they wanted to stop other people being victims of those offences, which I kind of knew it would be a reason. I perhaps didn't appreciate it would be the number one reason, if I'm honest. And so that's a learning point certainly for me. So I completely understand that, to protect people, and we must be better at using the full range of tools that we've got available to us. I mean, my preferred option is to charge someone and lock them up, frankly, because I'm a police officer and that's my job. And I make no apology for that. That's what we're here for, to protect the public, and that's what we do. But as you rightly say, we can't always do that because of the evidential standards, etc., whatever that might be. So there's a whole host of other things that we need to be doing, well, whether it's separating people, whether it's making use of protective orders. We have maybe an underutilised suite of orders, like civil orders that we can go for, whether it's domestic violence protection orders. There are other ones, sexual risk orders, things like that. That we've done a lot of work to try and increase the awareness of amongst our team so that they apply for those orders to give an additional protective mechanism, if you like. But there's also other things we can do, around submitting information so that people are, we're more joined up, so that we know that this person is out there. And I don't pretend we're there yet. There's more work to be done on there. But I think the kind of repeat suspect, which links into that protection from people, I think, very, very closely.
And the low conviction rates ties into that perpetrators are feeling emboldened at the moment.
Yes.
And that is something that really needs to be addressed, so that they are fully aware that the focus is going to be on them in an investigation as well, which is something that has come up, kind of another topic really I'm going on to here. There were comments, in the free text on the survey saying, officers have said to me, well, you were drunk, so you were, you might as well not go ahead.
That sort of stuff is...
it's really crucial that isn't perceived as a reason that people get away with offending, isn't it? Being drunk. People are entitled to go out and drink and have fun.
Yeah.
And it's a crucial point, and a lot of NFAs seem to come up where there is that drunkenness.
Yeah. And that is, I'll be honest, that is how rape investigations in the past used to happen. We need to get away from that.
I don't know about in the past.
Okay.
But yeah, I think we see that quite a bit, unfortunately. That someone might not be told directly it was their fault, but definitely we had some people were told, it's a bit of a blurred line here, or some passing comments, subtle comments, which to me says actually it's not in the past.
Yeah,
there are still officers practicing that way.
Yeah. That's really disappointing to hear, because we've started this journey around. So the point I was going to come on to was focusing on the suspect. So what we need to do is to focus on the suspect. So we don't. Well, I'd like to think we don't. Maybe that's not the case. But we need to get away from investigating victims and move on to investigating suspects. So why is that person hanging around in that bar? The evidence base tells us that actually the reason they might be hanging around in that bar on their own is probably so they can find someone who's vulnerable to go and offend against them. We need to. That is the mindset, I suppose, we're trying to instill across our officers. Absolutely. You need to be investigating them. Why is that person there? Follow them around on the CCTV. Are they doing other bars?
Yeah.
Are they? Why are they there?
That should be part of a case building approach.
Yes. But it is. Yeah. So we've done an awful lot of work around this, because the RASO team that we have, they're all experienced. They're all made up of experienced detectives, experienced DSs, and we've done training around suspect-centred investigations and how that should be presented to the Crown Prosecution Service, because we don't bring the cases to court. We have to go through the Crown Prosecution Service. It's a joint approach. Okay, we are the joint prosecution team. So we've put training out now to the whole of the detectives across Thames Valley, so they are fully aware that when they are writing up their document, which we have to provide to CPS, which outlines the case, which outlines what happens, we are looking at from a suspect-focused approach. Why was that person targeted? Was it because they've been, I don't know, perhaps they'd been separated from their friends? So the perpetrator's hanging around outside a club, he sees that person, he makes an approach to that person, and so it goes on. So we're looking at it far more from that side of things. From a CPS perspective, they've had the training as well. So when a case goes to the Crown Prosecution Service, there's a body of lawyers that are trained. I think there's 16 at the moment with our Crown Prosecution Service. All they do is they investigate sexual offences. So they are really highly, skilled in investigating sexual offences. They've all had the training as well to go with a suspect-centric approach. Okay. We understand that it's the suspect's decision to do what they want to do. We should be focusing on the suspect. So there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes as well, but there is definitely a shift from where we used to be in trying to get as much information around the victim to sort of say, well, have they got mental health issues before? Have they lied before? All this part
I'm
of that
glad
is,
you mentioned that. I was just going to say, in the survey it was mentioning someone actually said how their mental health, which was a result of what happened to them, was then used against them as a reason not to progress with their case. Now, I don't know about Thames Valley, but nationally that's still happening. I'm aware that's still happening, and it is completely unacceptable, because the reason they have maybe anxiety, depression or post-traumatic stress is because they've been abused or raped. So it's crucial that there is an understanding at every level.
It is, and that's an understanding. It's an understanding from the officer that's perhaps taking the account, from the victim, from the investigating team, from the lawyers that are reviewing it, from when it goes to court, from counsel when they're prosecuting it, and that's a lot of that is down to communication between everybody and having those conversations around it and saying, actually, you know, if we get a case, we've got a process now, so if we put a case forward to the Crown Prosecution Service and we think it's a really good case and they come back and say, well, actually, we're not happy with this, we don't want to charge it, we can appeal that, and we've been quite robust in appealing it. Last year, I think we appealed half a dozen and 5 of them we overturned and they went to court. So it's... there is a bit of a groundswell of change there. The thing is, Heather, as you and I both know, nothing happens overnight. It's a slow burner. But personally, I'm happy if it is a slow burner, if it means it does start to change.
Actually, the vast majority of victims that I know, Fiona and everyone here will know, that more offending happens within the context of a relationship, or by an ex-partner or a partner, long-term partner, and the survey reflected that there really was a lack of understanding from officers that that is where offending can happen. Much more, they consistently had a poorer experience in the police when they reported sexual violence within a partner relationship, unfortunately. But it's something, you know, it's so important to recognise that wider context and for officers to be able to understand that in a context-led approach. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that.
Can I add to that as well? Because I think actually context is very important, but what we still see in our practice is sometimes someone's going to come to us because they have been raped or sexually assaulted by an intimate partner, and then when they go and report to the police, the only thing that the police is going to focus on is the sexual violence, but often the survivor will not be given the opportunity to talk about the context, actually exactly what you're saying. And so I'm wondering why that is.
This is part of that journey that Fiona talked about. We don't pretend we get this right all the time. Again, I suppose historically that is the approach we've taken, and you focus just on the actual act of sexual violence rather than that wider context, and we need to get better at that. We understand that, and that is part of this is why we've revamped all our training for officers. This is why we're constantly reinforcing that message. It's the whole picture, what's led up to this, what's, you know, in the months, years, whatever it might be leading up to it, what has led to that point, to produce what we're trying to do is to produce a compelling, you know, convincing case for CPS so that they feel empowered to charge. You know, that's what we're trying to do. But you know, it's a journey. Well, I agree. I think
it is really important, and you know, I'm glad to see things are changing in that way. But the survivor-perpetrator relationship actually provides key information on how a case can be handled, doesn't it?
It does.
But it's actually can be really helpful for an investigation.
Yeah, and we've had this. You know, I've worked on domestic abuse, and you have cases that come forward that you know, there's a phenomenal. There's years of offending between the both parties, and sometimes it's just really difficult to kind of to understand the complexities of what that victim is going through to come forward and report. And quite often, you know, that's why we brought in body-worn video. Body-worn video, when it comes to prosecuting domestic violence offences, has been crucial in some cases, because a lot of and I appreciate that men suffer from domestic violence as well, but predominantly it's women that suffer from domestic violence. And we've had cases where women, quite rightly, have been in horrendous set of circumstances where we've turned up and we've dealt with the situation, we've arrested the perpetrator, we've taken them away, and the next day, because of the emotional attachment and a plethora of other reasons, that woman doesn't want to take anything forward because of the fear, because of everything that goes within the domestic violence arena. Yet with body-worn video, if we've got evidence actually recorded as to what's happened, of injuries, of, you know, when the perpetrator was arrested, we have had successful prosecutions where that person has been prosecuted, they've been able to escape, the woman's been able to escape from that. We've had support from, you know, various organisations that can support her on the way forward. It's a very, very difficult cycle to break. And we understand that it's so difficult, but yeah, I mean, it's, you know, that's a fact. Unfortunately, that is a fact, and that's something we are seeking to improve. And I know we sit here and we sort of say, well, it's we're trying to improve it. We really are, but it is sometimes really quite challenging. But it's only by having, you know, discussions like this and all that we're trying to do, and it's not just about the discussion we're having today, because, you know, we're all communicating anyway with various bits and pieces that we do outside of this, but yeah, it's a bit of a steep hill to climb sometimes. we can talk about, the public confidence in police in light of recent events and high-profile cases and where we are with that. And I know certainly that within Thames Valley Police, our professional standards department, who are the department that investigate the police, and that's for all aspects of wrongdoing that go on, because in an organisation as large as ours, unfortunately, we do have members of the police and staff members that perhaps are not as what's the best word the best way of putting it? Not as they don't comply with the role that they're in, I suppose.
We've got perpetrators in the organisation.
Yeah,
that's what we need to do. We don't need to shy away from that. This is not a problem that's just in the Met. It's a problem that's everywhere in every police force in the country, and we've got to recognise that, and we do recognise that, and we have. So, if I just come in just a general point around this, we have now a VORG strategy. It's not to say VORG is violence against women and girls. We, again, as you said earlier, Fiona, it's not just women as victims. We understand that men are victims of some of these offences as well. But if you look at that, the ethos translates across the whole organisation. We've got an internal trust and culture, trust and confidence piece, we call it really. And it's not just yes, of course we if someone falls below the standards of professional behaviour, whether that's whatever level that might be, up to including criminal, we hold them to account. Of course we do.
Can I ask? My understanding is that if a police officer from Thames Valley Police has been reported to be a perpetrator of sexual violence, it sounds like Thames Valley Police is going to investigate it. Why is that? Why is that not given to another force that might be less biased towards this police officer?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the circumstances. I'm not from the professional standards, so I don't investigate these people myself. I think what we have to make sure is we have to satisfy ourselves there is a fair investigation into it, really, whether that means that, depending on the circumstances, can we do that internally, or do we give it to another force to do? It depends on the circumstance of the individual case, I suppose, really.
And other forces have got their own professional standards departments, and I'm sure they're very busy as well.
Yeah.
So this is the thing.
Yeah.
We got 43 police forces. Each of them will have whether it's called professional standards or whatever it might be called, they will have a team that investigates the police. And it is impartial. They look at all the facts. We have cases if it's a case that is not going to be investigated internally, or they look at the findings and it's going to be going down the criminal lines, then they'll take it to court. It's not a case of they look at it and there's a bias to say, well, actually they're one of ours, we're not going to really take it forward. They'll look at all the facts, and if there's anything criminal there, then a criminal prosecution will take place. That will go to court, and then there will also be a misconduct case within our professional standards as well. So so it's.
I do take your point though. Yeah. I don't think I think the investigations are impartial and fair, but I understand where you're coming from. How does it look from the outside looking in? I suppose it's a valid. I get the point.
If you go do a referral to the IOPC, the Independent Office of Police Complaints, I've found that sometimes it does go back to the original force where it's a complaint, and it just does seem counterintuitive that it doesn't sit with an external organisation.
The police is seen as powerful. I don't know. I know when I was younger and I started driving, if I saw a police officer, I was like, what did I do? Even if I hadn't done anything. But this power is very, you feel it. And when I see a police officer in a room, I know they're a police officer because of the way they behave. So I think it's super important for officers in general to be very aware of the power that they have.
And to uphold those standards. It goes back to those standards, doesn't it, that we have to hold, because we police by consent, don't we? And we have to have that public trust and that public confidence, and obviously over recent times with some of the high profile events, that's taken a massive knock, which is why we realise it's important, and we put so much effort into trying to improve it, really. But
it's very sad. I find it very sad. I'm really proud to be a police officer. I've loved my job. I've loved every minute of my job. And when you get these people that bring our profession into disrepute, it makes me sad and angry in equal measure, really. Because at the end of the day, when I was a kid, it would be like, if you've got anything wrong, go and speak to a police officer. They'll help you. And I know you say, it is because we're warranted officers. I could arrest you if I felt you were doing something wrong. We've got that power. We can take away your liberty, but it shouldn't be abused.
It's that basic right to be able to call the police
Yes.
when someone's in danger,
Yes.
and just feeling able to do that,
Yeah.
and building that trust.
Exactly, and when you come to talk about sexual offences, it's interesting because there are some victims that will say the mere presence of a police officer turning up is absolutely fantastic for them. It's that they're so pleased to see them. It doesn't matter if they're male, female, whatever it may be. For other people, they feel that when they're talking to, if it's an officer in uniform, they may feel obliged to sort of, say, go along with what they're saying. So if they're saying, well, do you want to go to the sexual assault referral centre? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? It's almost being led by what they're saying and not have the power. And it's all about empowering the victim. It's everything we do should be victim led, so that they feel comfortable in reporting to us to take it forward. And when you look at after, if it's a first response officer that's there, a uniform officer, everybody else they're going to deal with is going to be plain clothes. The solos are plain clothes, the detectives are plain clothes, your ISFAs when you get involved. I know you're independent, but it's that uniform sometimes. And it's interesting, and the dynamic has, I think, shifted, and it's been really really unhelpful with all these awful people that have come to light, that have been purveying these sexual crimes against people. So
can I just go back to first responders in uniform?
Yeah.
Because that reminds me of something that we've experienced recently, where police officers show up at survivors' home.
Yeah.
And for some people, that's absolutely fine, they're not bothered, but a lot of the survivors we work with are actually bothered by this because there's a police car in front of their house. Sometimes there are some cultural context to know about, and I know that there have been times where it's brought shame on the family, or the whole neighbourhood could see that car, and then that's created a lot of tension within that family, that the police car and the police in uniform showed up at the door. Is there kind of more awareness being raised? Is there more protocols that are being investigated around that?
I think with those sort of cases, if it's going to be a uniform car that's going to be turning up, unless it's the first time they've attended, it's probably going to be an offence that is being investigated by a uniform officer. And normally they will make phone calls to try and get hold of people. The fact of the matter is, if they can't get hold of someone, they're going to go round and they're going to knock on the door, and that might cause issues. But a lot of what we do and a lot of what we deal with, it can be resolved with communication, and it's talking to people, trying to get hold of people. If we can't get hold of that victim and they've got an ISFA, then we'll come to you and say, look, we can't get hold of whoever it is, can you try and reach them for us? But I think in relation to the sort of I know what you're talking about, because I've had one of these cases raised to me before, where it's the whole having a police car there. Sometimes a police car in the area is great, it can be a deterrent and it can provide comfort, but when you come to sort of the cultural side of things, that can cause difficulties. We haven't got anything in place that I'm aware of at the moment that's addressing that.
I think this is all about the procedural justice approach to victims, and how that person want to be treated and how they want to be seen, where they want to be seen, all that sort of stuff. And we would always try and like Fiona says, have that conversation on the phone or by email or whatever, however it might be, in advance, to make sure we don't make matters worse inadvertently by going and parking a police car outside. Sometimes we get that wrong, and sometimes if we can't get hold of someone, we've got to make a decision around what are we going to do. Is it, bear in mind the information we now know about that person, is it right that we don't go and see them? And actually sometimes we have to go because we want to make sure they're safe. But again, that's not always the right thing, and that is difficult.
I know, going back to the survey, there was a very low number of respondents from various sort of ethnicities. Is Thames Valley Police reaching out to those communities in any way, sort of proactively, to raise safety levels there, because we know things are not going well for some people?
This is so if I take that in just the first bit at a time. So the first bit for me is, first of all, understanding we're talking about the protected characteristics, which of those protected characteristics that person might have. We might have a conversation with someone, whether someone's from a particular ethnic background or particular sexual orientation, whatever that might be. We need to figure out where we record it and how we record it is the first point. So we need to get our data better, so we understand what our kind of what that is, because and generally my experience of they're probably more vulnerable. Some groups of people can be more vulnerable because of those protected characters. Not all, of course. That's a bit of a generalisation, but actually it can be an increased vulnerability. So we need to understand that more. Is the first point. We definitely need to do more to interact once we do that and to gauge people's views. We did have I think it was £1.4 million worth of funding that went to the PCC's office in February, and they are working with certain survivors groups across the Thames Valley to help kind of run focus groups and to understand the dynamics of what's going on in particular communities. Can we do more? Yes. Have we got information gaps? Yes. I think definitely.
So the survey results are saying the number of respondents from LGBTQIA communities was very low, but we know that incidence of sexual violence in these communities is high. So that is an area where links need to be made, I think, with those communities. And same with, although the survey looks at black and ethnic minority ethnicities, but really that needs to be broken down further because it just focuses on more on black ethnicities and Asian ethnicities, but really BAME is an old terminology in the survey that's still being used, unfortunately. But we don't have that data yet, but there clearly needs to be some kind of connections
feels like
with those things.
Sorry, it feels like there's a gap.
Yeah.
For me. And I think common sense and sort of instinct feels like there's a gap. And I suppose the survey results back that up, don't they? Really, I think we, but I think we could always do more to support or to reach out into different groups of people. I think really, I suppose, is the upshot of it.
I think it's really difficult because if you think about it, a few years ago, male rape was hardly reported. Men never got raped. Now we get a large proportion of male rape reported, which is brilliant because they're more comfortable at coming forward and engaging and staying engaged, and there's more support. So things like when you're talking about hard to reach communities, things like the Gypsy Roma community, things like we've got a massively diverse population within Thames Valley across the 3 counties, and there are certainly and I would say a lot of it is cultural, and it's how you reach those communities. What you need is unfortunately, you need someone who's had a lived experience from within that community that can then spread the word, which again does happen. Don't get me wrong, but it's a massive mountain to climb, and for us to get into those communities. And you talk about the LGBTQI community in there. We, I think, now are better at supporting them than we were before. Still a lot of work to do, but improvements have been made. But there are still a lot of people out there from different cultures, different communities that we are just not tapping into, and we know things are happening.
I think you look at the survey results. One of the things that came out was education level of people that replied to the survey or didn't. So that's that's not a kind of recognised. Protected characteristics, if you like, but it's a different section of the community. So you've got, and I don't know the reasons why, but is that because that section of the community feels more empowered to report? They're victimised against more. We're not supporting other sections of the community who haven't had a university education. There's all sorts of questions that it throws. So it doesn't give you a conclusion, but it provokes the thought that actually. We need to be mindful of diversity in all different ways and shapes and forms, I suppose, really, not just the ones that we traditionally tend to think of diversity in, I suppose.
And on that note, it's, that there's no preempting of whether a case should go to court, really, or I know it's not your decision, it's the CPS's decision, the Crown prosecution make the decision of a case going to court, but it's that preemptive at the police stage is a case no further action because they think this person isn't going to present well in court, or a jury isn't going to like this person, or whatever it is, and it's that could be unconscious bias as well, but we just don't know. But it's one of those things that I wonder, as it is for sometimes with NFA no further action decisions, whether that could be a factor as well sometimes.
I think you could rewind it a step further, because if you I don't know the example you're talking about, but you've got the case of someone who an officer will interact with a victim, and it may be the way they speak to them means that the person just disengages right from the outset. Because and if you have that, and they may not do that consciously, that may be a completely unconscious thing, but if that happens, then of course you inadvertently almost sort of screen that case out, don't you, really, in terms of how it's dealt with. So I wouldn't like to think that there's a decision, if we get the evidence, irrespective of the circumstances of the case, the evidence breaches that threshold, it should go to CPS for a charging decision. That's the point. It's how we get to that point, before, I suppose.
Yeah, and I'd agree. I think with and I can only speak from rape because that's primarily what I deal with. We've had some victims that have come to us that, you know, they've been really quite challenging in how they presented. Doesn't matter, they've still been raped, and we've put them before the court, and we've got convictions. So whatever it is, we will do our utmost to overcome it. You know, and you know, we've had cases. You talking about hard to reach communities, and just we've had cases involving sex workers. Well, years ago, sex workers were treated in a completely different way to how they are now. You know, and now we've had number of cases where we've had really successful prosecutions.
But again, I feel like when you say things like this, in a way, I have seen some change, and and also in another way, I've seen steps backward. And I think, I wonder if that comes into, you have provided a lot of training to some officers, but then we also know that a lot of the force is new, and a lot is, and so how are you going to ensure that there is consistency in the way, because training is great, but there is a lot. Is it
cultural change.
80% of your force that's like
less than 2 years on response? So
that is huge. And sometimes we feel like we're educating people, but it's because we are. And it's just because we actually know more than them, because we've been in the job for longer.
So I suppose, so when you look at the training side of things, if you've got officers that are perhaps solos or detectives, they've been in the job a reasonable number of years, and they're in a role where they're probably going to be for a reasonable number of years. When you look at the shift officers or the response officers, they come in, they do their 2-year probationary period on shift, and then they can decide to go and do something else. They can stay on shift, whatever they want to do. There is a high turnover of staff. So training for those officers is not a one-off training. Training for those officers should be annual, perpetual. We try and do as much as we can to maintain that in the area of sexual offending. I can't speak for any other areas of training, but yeah, with that particular sort of demographic of those officers, we need to do the continuous training, because, as you say, the turnover is so big, and you've got officers that are coming in that are younger, that might not have life experience. You've got officers that are trying to manage and trying to juggle any number of different offences, and so you need to be keeping fresh in what the current sort of training is. When it comes to the sort of the training of the detectives, then and a lot of training is about your self-awareness as well. It's your responsibility to make sure that you're trained to a certain degree.
Sorry, I need to read this because these are quotes from the survey. So one of the quotes is, "I was more traumatized by the way the police dealt with me than what actually happened, and would never go to them for help again. And I am more afraid of the police than being raped again." How does that make you feel to read statements like this?
Really, really sad. Really sad. That's it. I've investigated sexual offences all my career, and I would like to think that we are further forward than we were 30 years ago. And we are in a lot of respects, but then when you get comments like that, it just makes me feel very sad. And there is a lot that we need to do. There are changes that are being made, but at the end of the day, I understand through lived experience of dealing with victims how difficult it is for people to come forward, how brave people are. How amazing it is when in the days when I did do visually recorded interviews, I had someone sat in front of me that had to tell me about the worst thing that happened to them, and it is really sad.
I'll give you a short answer. I'll give you a short answer because Fiona's giving you a long answer. Horrified. That's it.
Yeah, and did you find it surprising when you read statements like this in the survey?
Yeah, I did. The strength of them surprised me. It doesn't surprise me that the police don't deal with rapes as well as we could do. That doesn't surprise me at all. But the strength of the comments within that report did surprise me, actually.
Okay, because for us it was absolutely not surprising as it was to read this. Everything that's in the survey we knew. We've heard that on a almost daily basis. So I think it's very powerful that it's now officially kind of captured, but I also think it's a bit of a shame that there had to be a survey for this to be acknowledged, because we've been saying this for years, I think. I just wanted say that.
So a lot of respondents to the survey said they had not received any communications from the police for over 3 months. How can this change, really? I mean, it's 3 months is a long time not to hear anything, unless they've agreed, given the length of sexual violence cases, that they don't want contact that often, but usually 3 months should be a minimum. And they're not hearing anything, and as an ISVA, that is a lot of our role, is sometimes to find out who we should be talking to and trying to liaise with the police, and it sometimes is quite difficult. You know, it does vary a lot. I work with forces all over the UK, and I do find it particularly difficult sometimes getting information from Thames Valley Police compared with other forces.
I mean, that's disappointing to hear again. I mean, we've got a statutory responsibility to communicate with victims in line with certain timescales and in line with what the contract that's agreed at the beginning. So again, we have done work on this, but we're obviously not where we need to be. Really, I think there's no other way to just to not assuming that 3 months is outside the agreement with the victim, which it probably is, isn't it? Let's be honest. I mean, I agree with you. I think that's unusual to agree to 3 month length of contact. I think that's just not acceptable, really, to be honest.
And I think there's also, what I've noticed is inconsistencies in the contracting. I use contracting. There is an agreement at the beginning. So some officers are great, are saying, when would you like me to contact you to give you updates about the case? Others just don't even ask, and so we have to then be like, have you asked this question, and when are you going to update the survivor? What is the agreement? But also, I have seen some police officers say, actually, I know you're asking me for a monthly update, but what I would prefer is that you get in touch with me. And I don't think that's okay if the survivor wants update from the police officer to then put it back on them under a kind of empowering pretext.
No, the officer should be making contact with the victim, and everybody's different. We have victims that might need an enhanced contact, so they've got more regular contact. You might have victims say, actually, if we know it's going to be a more protracted case, they might say, do you know what, I only want a call once a month. And it might be, I just want to call, some people just want to call when there's something to update on. I mean, personally, I think if it's a case like that once a month, we should be doing anyway, just to say, hi, how you doing, anything I can do to support you. I know we've got nothing to update you on, but this is where we are, kind of thing. So
within that, I think the communication of no further action decisions, there's been a lot that I've noticed come my way where I haven't been made aware of that, and I see that as an ISVA as a crucial point where ISVA support could be helpful for a victim, and not being involved in that process, or almost actively not involved in meeting times changed and someone's gone to see the victim without letting me know, and it's that kind of that support. As you said, it would be good if we're all seen as that we can give the best service to victims. Best practice is to have us all involved as we go as a collectively, and along that side, that the NFAs, I know this is sort of two questions really. Victims are not consistently being informed about victims' right to review, and as we understand, not every case is going to be appropriate for review. There might be very clear reasons why not, but we've found it very difficult to get any. Before we help someone apply for victims' right to review, we often need a bit more detail on the reasons why their case didn't go forward, and just saying, so often we hear victims saying it's just insufficient evidence, or it's just your word against theirs, and that's not really enough. And the Centre for Women's Justice will back us up and say that victims have a right to a crystal clear reasons for why on their specific evidence a case didn't go forward, and that we're just not getting that at all.
So there's a couple of points I'd say around that. It's not acceptable in terms of all the bits you said there. I agree. I think the NOM has got under its pillar 3, its procedural justice approach, a couple of bits of work coming forward, which we hope will help with this, around a new victim contract specific for RASO victims, as opposed to the wider criminal justice system, and that has things like ISVA's names in it, ISVA's contact details, And the idea is we share that with the CPS as well. So we do that early on in the case. So we have a kind of like, I suppose it's not dissimilar to the contrast I have now, but it's a much more enhanced version with things that you would want in a sexual violence case, I suppose, as opposed to other cases. So we hope that will help with that. And that we haven't got that in place yet.
Will that also be consistently used through the whole force, not just the detectives that are investigating just rapes?
I don't know whether it'll be rolled out to just rapes or whether it'll be involved to a wider RASO cases as well. I don't know. Because
it would be brilliant if that was the case, because that's where we're seeing
that's where the problem is, isn't it?
Especially with sexual assault.
Yeah.
So we haven't got to that stage of the implementing it yet, but I know it's coming. We've seen the documents. It will be part of our plans to put that in, and I'll take your feedback on board around it. There'll be benefits for more victims as opposed to just rapes, and I suppose similar to the filing as well. And there's a better way to impart that decision that it's not going to go to. There's going to be no further action. Essentially, it's not going to go forward for a charge. There are lots of documents coming out of Bluestone on how to do that. Both, I think it's important to do this in a couple of ways. Really, yes, to involve the ISVAs. I think that's common sense. I think, if I'm honest, but also to provide that information in a number of ways. Because I think my experience of this, and yours would be way more than mine, but my experience is that you tell someone something and they only hear perhaps the first. Once you break the news to them, they hear that part of it, and then they I'm not criticising them. They zone out for the rest of it because they're trying to process that bit and they don't hear the rest of the information.
It's such a hard thing to hear. So
So the idea is that we provide. So we explain it as best we can at the time. Don't get wrong, accepting the fact that it's difficult for people to hear in those circumstances. But then we provide a much more comprehensive written document they can digest at their own. Whenever the time is right for them, I suppose, really. So there's again, it's not in yet. It will be, but it's part of the NOM implementation. So that's really, I suppose that's why the NOM have recommended documents such as that, and all forces adopt them, and we will be adopting it as all the other forces.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one being implemented, because hopefully that will lead to more consistency and us working more together to support survivors, and also in terms of no further action decisions being communicated, we still see them being communicated by text. Sorry, we're not taking your case further. That's it, nothing else, or an email. And then even if there's an ISVA involved, they will chase and say, can you please provide a letter? Can we please have a meeting? And then the ISVA has to chase. And I always wonder, what about those people who do not have an ISVA? Like, how are they being treated? And the police officer is not being challenged. So I guess there are several things here.
It's interesting because it's an area where the survey results tie exactly the same as your experiences, aren't they?
Yeah.
Exactly the same.
Yeah, and that's why, even though some of the testimonies in the surveys are maybe 5 years ago, what we see as ISVAs is actually not that different. And we see some teams where there's a lot of improvement. We do see, patterns in teams, obviously, and some teams where it's been completely backwards, and that's not acceptable. And I think I was sitting with a survivor the other day, and she was asking me, is it my fault? Is it my fault? Am I not being taken seriously because what happened to me was not bad enough? And what am I supposed to say when all the agencies around her were just not working the right way and not giving her the support that she needed?
That's sad to hear again.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. You know what, Fiona, I'm going to ask you, because I feel like I've been asking questions to Stuart the whole time.
That suits me.
Would you describe Thames Valley Police as a trauma-informed force? Probably
Elaborate
in
on
terms of responding to victims and survivors of sexual violence.
When we engage with a victim from the very get-go, we want them to have the trust in the police to stay with us, to not disengage for whatever reason. And the more that we understand about the trauma of how these offences affect different people, then the better we can become at that.
Yeah, in our experience, there are some very good officers and officers that are absolutely not trauma-informed. What do you think are the next steps in terms of making the whole force more kind of trauma-informed, especially the officers who are going to deal with sexual assault, sexual violence? cases.
I mean, it is a lot of it. I always say a lot of things are centred around communication and training, and training, but the right bespoke training is crucial. I'm not going to say it's easy, because we have delivered a lot of training and we still are making mistakes. But on the flip side of that, I know in some cases that have been highlighted to me where we've put the training in and somebody's then gone and dealt with the victim, we know it's worked in a positive way because they've understood a little bit more about it.
I think the only thing I would add to that is that we are starting to train our officers more in, I know we talked about training a lot, but training our officers more in their own trauma as well. So we hope that sometimes that would actually, whether that's through individual incidents or repeated investigation of serious crimes such as rape, we are increasing their own self-awareness, which we hope will have an impact on how they obviously deal with members of the public by increasing that awareness. And one more point before we just round up is that actually we want them to be trauma aware, trauma informed. Then we don't want to be experts. That's not their job, and that's where you might see a bit of a difference, I suppose, in terms of how that's not their job. But we do want them to understand and to have those empathy and to understand what's going on in that person's life at that point, really, I suppose. So I think that's the end of our conversation then. So hopefully you've heard the issues we've been debated. The survey is open for another year. The link will appear on the screen now. So you have an opportunity to contribute to this further, so you can help us as a group understand more what's going on and therefore improve what we do to help you and other members of the public, really. So thank you for listening.